screams from a bloodthirsty crowd, a young mother separated from her newborn baby, a pregnant slave facing death for refusing to renounce her faith. This is the disturbing account of two women whose lives and deaths represent one of the most impressive testimonies of determination recorded in ancient history. Today, we reveal the true story of Perpetua and Felicitas, two mothers whose brutal execution in the arenas of Carthage shocked even the Romans, who were so accustomed to violence. A story so impactful that its narrative, partially written by Perpetua herself, remains one of the oldest known texts authored by a Christian woman. Vibia Perpetua was born into a noble Roman family around the year 180 of the Christian era in Thuburbo Minus, near Carthage in the Roman province of Africa, what is now modern-day Tunisia. Young, well-educated, and of privileged status, Perpetua had everything a woman could desire in Roman society: status, wealth, and a secure future. Felicitas, on the other hand, was her personal domestic slave, living in the lowest condition of Roman society. She was the property of another human being, without rights, without a voice, and at the time of her arrest, 8 months pregnant. How then did these two women of such distinct social conditions end up sharing the same tragic fate? What could unite a Roman noblewoman and her slave in such a horrible end? The answer is simple yet extraordinary for their time. Both had converted to a forbidden religion, Christianity. In the year 203, during the reign of Emperor Septimius Severus, a new wave of persecution against Christians swept across North Africa. An imperial edict had specifically prohibited conversion to Judaism and Christianity, with severe punishments for offenders. It was in this context that Perpetua, then 22 years old and a mother of a baby just a few months old, was arrested along with other catechumens. Among them were her slave Felicitas and 3 men, Revocatus, Saturninus, and Secundulus. What makes the story of Perpetua and Felicitas particularly remarkable is that much of it was recorded by Perpetua herself in a diary she wrote in prison. This is an extraordinary document that survived as part of the work known as The Passion of Perpetua and Felicitas. In this first-person account, Perpetua describes her experiences from her arrest to the moments that preceded her execution with astonishing clarity and firmness of purpose. In the first days of captivity, Perpetua faced not only the terror of the Roman prison, which was notorious for its inhumane conditions, but also the anguish of being separated from her newborn baby, whom she was still breastfeeding. "I was tormented with worry for my baby," she wrote. Her father, a devoted pagan, visited her repeatedly in prison, begging her to renounce her faith for the sake of her child. In a moving scene recorded by Perpetua, he threw himself down before me, tearing at his beard and casting himself face down upon the ground, cursing his years and uttering such words as might move any creature. But neither the love for her child nor her father's despair could shake Perpetua's resolution. After days of torment, they finally allowed her baby to stay with her in prison, which she described as a divine grace. Suddenly, she wrote, "The prison became a palace for me, so that I preferred being there to anywhere else." While Perpetua faced her own torment, Felicitas was going through an additional trial. 8 months pregnant, she feared that her execution would be postponed, as Roman law prohibited the execution of pregnant women. Ironically, she feared being separated from her companions in martyrdom. According to the account, Felicitas went into premature labor just 2 days before the date set for the execution. When a guard mocked her moans of pain during childbirth, asking how she would face the beasts if she could barely endure labor, Felicitas replied, "What I suffer now, I suffer alone. But then another will be in me who will suffer for me, because I too will suffer for him." This is one of the most powerful moments in the account. The simplicity with which Felicitas expresses her faith in Christ's presence during her own suffering is breathtaking. Felicitas's child, a girl, was given to a Christian woman to be raised, as would later be Perpetua's baby. The eve of the execution brought a traditional banquet known as the Cena Libra, the Last Supper offered to the condemned. The Christians transformed this moment into a celebration of faith, making it an agape meal. Witnesses report that Perpetua and her companions ate in public as if it were a feast, not a prelude to death, and they addressed the crowd of onlookers with statements about divine judgment and the joy of martyrdom. This attitude of peaceful defiance and joy in the face of death confused the Romans, for whom earthly life and social status were supreme values. The morning of March 7th, 203 AD, marked the beginning of the games in honor of the birthday of the emperor's son, Geta. Perpetua, Felicitas, who had given birth just days before, and their companions were led to the amphitheater of Carthage. According to accounts, they walked with radiant faces, not with fear, but with joy. Perpetua is described as following with a shining countenance and a calm step, as the beloved of God. Meanwhile, Felicitas walked exultant at having given birth in time to face the beasts with her companions. The prisoners were led into the arena wearing tunics. Initially, the men were to face a wild boar, a bear, and a leopard, while Perpetua and Felicitas were assigned to a wild cow. This was a deliberately humiliating choice, as the cow was a symbol of the goddess Juno, whom respectable Roman women venerated. Before the games began, the guards tried to force the prisoners to wear ritual garments. The men were given the vestments of priests of Saturn, and the women the vestments of priestesses of Ceres, pagan deities whose worship was linked to imperial power. This was a final effort to force them into a symbolic act of worship of the Roman gods. Perpetua resisted, saying, "We came here of our own free will, so that our freedom would not be violated. We gave our lives precisely to avoid doing such things." Impressed by her courage, the tribune allowed them to face the beasts without the ritual garments. What followed was a demonstration of Roman brutality at the height of its public expression. The men were exposed to the beasts and eventually killed by gladiators. When it came time for Perpetua and Felicitas, they were stripped and placed in nets to be exposed to a wild cow. Even the Roman audience, accustomed to graphic violence, was shocked to see a recently delivered mother with breasts still dripping milk, and a young noblewoman being treated with such indignity. In a rare display of public mercy, the crowd shouted for the women to be brought back and dressed in loose tunics. Perpetua was the first to be attacked, thrown into the air by the cow and falling on her back. According to the account of a witness who completed her diary, she sat up and, noticing that her clothes were torn on the side, she pulled them to cover her thigh, more mindful of her modesty than her pain. Then, seeing Felicitas thrown to the ground, Perpetua extended her hand and lifted her up. There the two stood, side by side, having survived the first round of torture. The crowd demanded that they be brought to the Porta Vivaria gate, where gladiators awaited them for the final execution. Perpetua, described as if in a trance, seemed not to realize what had happened, asking when they would be delivered to the cow. When told she had already faced the animal, she did not believe it until she saw the marks on her body and her torn clothes. In the final moment, the condemned Christians exchanged the kiss of peace, a significant ritual in which they greeted each other as equals before God. This was a striking contrast to Roman social stratification. They then voluntarily advanced to their final execution by sword. The executioner designated for Perpetua was a novice gladiator whose hand trembled. After a first failed blow that hit her bones and caused her extreme pain, Perpetua, in an extraordinary final act, guided the man's hand to her throat, for the fatal blow. The account concludes, "Perhaps such a woman feared by the unclean spirit could not be killed unless she herself willed it." The story of Perpetua and Felicitas quickly became one of the most influential and venerated martyrdom accounts in the early Christian church. St. Augustine, who lived 2 centuries later in Carthage, preached annual sermons on the anniversary of their martyrdom, March 7th. This became their liturgical feast day, a date that still remains in the Christian liturgical calendar. What makes the martyrdom of these 2 women so exceptional? Perhaps it is the extraordinary reversal of social norms it represents in a rigidly hierarchical Roman society. Perpetua, a noblewoman, and Felicitas, a slave, should have been separated by an insurmountable social chasm. However, their common faith united them in a sisterhood that transcended all social barriers, making them equal companions before God, sharing the same fate and the same crown of martyrdom. Moreover, in a society where women rarely had a public voice or control over their own narratives, Perpetua not only chose her destiny against all family and social pressures, but also recorded her own story, leaving a document that has survived for almost 2 millennia. Her diary represents one of the first instances in Western history of a woman speaking with her own voice, documenting her spiritual experience and her resolution in the face of death. For early Christian communities, often persecuted and socially marginalized, the story of Perpetua and Felicitas offered a powerful counterpoint to the Roman imperial narrative. While Rome valued hierarchy, power, and conformity, these women exemplified equality, peaceful resistance, and spiritual freedom. The image of 2 mothers, a noblewoman and a slave, united in their determination and in their martyrdom, became a powerful symbol of a new social order based not on status, but on shared faith. The story of these 2 mothers also resonates with a profound irony. In a society that valued women primarily as bearers of children and perpetuators of family lineages, Perpetua and Felicitas chose to abandon their newborn babies. This was not out of disdain for motherhood, but out of loyalty to a higher principle. This choice, perhaps the most difficult imaginable for any mother, underscores the intensity of their conviction. Thus ended the earthly existence of 2 of the most remarkable female figures of Christian antiquity. Not on comfortable deathbeds surrounded by their families and children, as would have been the natural fate of a Roman matron and a slave who survived the rigors of her condition, but in the public arena. They were united in their death as they had been in their faith, offering a testimony that defied Roman notions of power, status, and even motherhood. Their story represents a disturbing inversion of expectations. The beasts meant to tear apart their bodies ended up tearing down instead the invisible walls of Roman hierarchy. The sword that ended their earthly lives simultaneously immortalized their names, and the bodies of 2 fragile new mothers, thrown unceremoniously into the arena of Carthage, became the seeds of a spiritual revolution that would eventually transform the very empire that tried to exterminate them. If you enjoyed this video and want to know more impactful stories about martyrs of the faith, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss anything. Leave your comments suggesting which historical figure or saint you would like to see in our next video. Until next time.